I'm going to use this little video here to show you the capabilities of WebFOCUS to do aggregation function. So if you look into the WebFOCUS function menu, you're going to find a bunch of very useful functions. By default, they are grouped in categories. So actually in here, they are the main function information. Personally, I really like the new functionality that were introduced a few years back already, which are the analytical functions. So those functions cover a bunch of areas. So I'm going to just cover one to get you an idea on what they can be used for. So in general, they are used to do some very specific aggregations in here. So there's some forecasting capabilities, which are going to get you the capability to do some forecasting, like you got a timeline and you want to get some prediction on how those numbers are going to change in the next few months based on the mathematical scheme here. You could do partition referencing, you could do increase, quite nice kind of capabilities. So there's some things like a running average, a running max, a running minimum, running total. So there's a bunch of very nice type of features. Actually, we're going to look into one function for the sample, which is going to be the partition aggregation, which is quite useful to do non-standard aggregation. So partition aggregation is meant to do an aggregation within a different type of sort field. So let me start with a report. So we're going to go over to my Focus Designer. I already created a very simple report in here. So I got my product category, subcategory, and I got gross profit. So actually, I want to have an additional column in here that gets me a gross profit per product category. So not per subcategory, but per category. To achieve that, I can just simply go in here, add a calculation, and that calculation I want to add, again, is going to be calculation after aggregation, which is the default if I click on a summary field. And I'm going to select a function in here and I go for the analytical advanced features. So in here, again, if you look into that list, you got that analytical functions in here. They are their own category. So we're going to use them. And we're going to go for partition aggregation now. So we're going to go for that one because that's the one I really like. So again, gross profit, remove it from here. So that's the function. The function itself is expecting the field, which is, if you check the manual, the field is going to be at the end the measure you want to use. You can combine it with a different type of prefix operator to do like something like a standard deviation, a total, a min, a max. So you can do some more complex calculations in here. I'm going to skip that one. So we're going to go for the measure itself. So we're going to go back to Designer, and that measure, we're going to go back to our field list. So we're going to go to discount and add a discount in here. Then we have the reset key. Reset key means when or what's the aggregation field that I want to base it on. So if I want to base it on something like my product category, this would be product category. So I can move up here, so we can go to the dimensions, and we're going to go to the product category, and we're going to take the product category as the reset key. So reset key is when it changes or resets the calculation, the aggregation. Lower and upper at the end allow me to do some more complex calculations. So lower and upper means I can tell those functions I want to start with the current value, which would have been 0, or I can go for n minus n, which means I want to go a certain amount of elements bottom or a certain amount of elements to top. So I can go, let's say, if I would have a timeline, the n would go into the future, the minus n would go into the past. If we go to Designer, if I would use something like a minus in here, it would mean within that column, a -2 would take this value here for the calculation. So you can move through the column to do calculations in here. Quite useful as well if you're using the reference feature. So the reference feature would allow you to go and do a calculation where you're going to take this value and always subtract the one that's 2 levels above and things like that. So you can do quite complex calculation to do inter-column calculations, getting to a different row within the elements in here. Moving back over here, we also have B, which means it's the first value. So it's starting for the base in that calculation. So I can go back to here. So we're going to take dB. It's similar for upper. So upper is going to be the top end of your calculation. So that's going to be C, which means whenever the rolling calculation ends, you got N or minus N as we had, or we have E, meaning you're going to go to the end of the calculation. So going back here, we're going to end. So we're going to take everything from the first value in the accessories to the last one. That's what it means. And the post aggregation, so going down in the calculation, there you could select what kind of calculation you want to use. So in addition to the prefix operators, you could also use the sum in here, or the max or median mode, whatever you want to use as your calculation formula in that thing. So actually I want to go for a basic calculation, just adding something up. So now I got my calculation. So let me copy that one here now. And I'm going to select OK. And we created that new calculation in our data. So it's going to edit. So in here, you see now I got the total within the product accessory category. So it's always the same value until the category changes. Instead of just doing it by a sort field, and you could use any sort field that you're using in here, you could also do the same thing. Like go in here, add one more calculation, and that one in here is going to be based on the same formula, but now I'm not going to use product category. I could also do something like table, which means it's going to take all the data. So that's going to get us a grand total of elements. So clicking on 4K. I now get an additional column in here, which is now the total across all those elements. So quite nice to get different aggregation levels. Of course, I could also build a calculation now that shows me how the difference between those two values is going to look like. So we can do very complex calculations in here. So quite nice, quite useful to work with those type of calculations. Again, I mentioned the aggregation function in here. Again, there's something like rolling averages, which is quite useful as well. Or going back to the list of elements, you could also go to things like like the previous, which is going to get you the previous value. You could also use something like the partition reference. Let me go in here into the partition reference. So partition reference means you could select something like you're taking the days delayed by product category and you're using -1 for that new day thing. And what you get in here now actually is the day delayed, and new days is going to be the previous entry in that list. So it's going to be this value in that column, this value in that column. And you can do the same thing, like when do you want to, where do you want to reset those values as well? So you could do something like in here. So we can take something like the partition reference, put it into our calculation as well. So let's add a new calculation in here. So we're going to go to gross profit again. We're going to add one more calculation in here. And now we're going to go to the functions, and we're going to go to our, we need to, if you don't see the aggregation, don't forget to change calculate after aggregation. Now you got the advanced analytics function. So now we can go to partition reference, gross profit. I'm going to put gross profit into the field in here. So I got the partition reference. I got the reset key, which means when do I want to start? So we can go to something like, let's go to -3. And the reset key actually is going to be the full table in here. Take it. Adding the value, and see the first 3 are empty because I'm going 3 lines up. You see that 35,000 is the value from here. So it's 3 lines above the column that I'm currently in. So you can go to the previous rows in that elements in here. So you see that's the exact same values. Then you got a gross profit, just shifted 3 values down in that list. So that's a nice thing if you got something like a timeline and you want to calculate current year or current month value, and you want to, for example, subtract the previous month value and things like that. So that's a quite nice and easy way to get to calculations that pick up values from a previous record and keep them in the report. So if you never looked into that calculation functions, you might want to give it a look, because it's quite handy, quite nice to do complex calculations that pick up values on a different aggregation level, that pick up values from a different line. So a very nice one to build calculations that are more than the standard ones that you might know from reports. And that's it in that little session. Play around. Let me know what you think.